She called the wrong number crying. The stranger who answered offered a fake marriage that changed her life. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She called the wrong number crying. The stranger who answered offered a fake marriage that changed her life. Rain hammered the windows of a small apartment in downtown Seattle. The clock on the wall blinked 11:47 p.m. as Lila Carter sat on the floor beside her bed, phone in hand, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. Bills were scattered across the carpet, rent, hospital, utilities, each one shouting louder than the thunder outside. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her contacts. One name lingered on the screen: Jake, the ex-boyfriend who had promised to help but disappeared when her mother got sick. Desperation made her thumb press call. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Jake?" she whispered. Voice cracked. A deep male voice answered, calm and distant. "I think you have the wrong number." Lila froze. "Oh God, I am so sorry. I thought I was calling someone else." She tried to hang up, but the man's tone softened. "You sound upset. Are you safe?" That simple question broke her. Tears streamed again as she whispered, "I lost my job. My mom's in the hospital and the landlord wants me out by Friday. I just needed to talk to someone, anyone." On the other end of the line, Ethan Hale leaned against the balcony railing of his penthouse suite. The city lights flickered far below. He had been reading another ruthless article about him, the cold-hearted CEO, the machine in a tailored suit. Yet here, through a wrong number, he was listening to a woman who sounded raw, human, real. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Lila," she murmured. "Lila," he repeated slowly, as if testing the shape of her name. "You do not know me, but maybe I can help." She laughed bitterly. "Unless you are a magician or a billionaire, there is nothing anyone can do." A pause. Then his voice lowered, steady and deliberate. "What if I am the second one?" Lila blinked, stunned. "What?" Ethan looked out over the skyline, his reflection framed by the rain-streaked glass. "You need a way out, and I need something that looks real for 6 months. A partnership, a contract marriage. You would not owe me love or loyalty, just your presence. In return, your debts and your mother's care would be covered." For a long time, only the sound of rain filled the silence between them. Lila thought it was some cruel joke, another stranger mocking her weakness. "This is insane," she whispered. "Maybe," Ethan said softly, "but it could also be the start of something neither of us expected." Lila's breath caught. The world outside rumbled, thunder rolling over the city like fate taking its first step. And for the first time in months, she hesitated, not because she was afraid of losing everything, but because she felt, somehow, she might be about to gain something that mattered. She wiped her tears, clutching the phone tighter. "If I say yes, what happens next?" Ethan's reply came after a heartbeat, calm and sure. "Then, Miss Carter, you pack your things. My driver will find you tomorrow morning. We have a deal to make." The line clicked, leaving Lila alone in the glow of her phone screen, heart pounding. The wrong number had just changed her life forever. The morning came gray and heavy with fog. Lila stood outside her apartment building, clutching a small suitcase that held everything she owned. Her mother's hospital bracelet was looped around her wrist like a reminder of why she was doing this. Every step felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's story. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, tall, professional, and silent. He opened the door and said simply, "Miss Carter, Mr. Hale is expecting you." Lila slid into the back seat, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The city passed by in blurs of glass and steel until the car stopped in front of a towering building with mirrored windows that reached into the clouds. Hale Industries. Inside, the marble floors gleamed. People in suits moved with purpose, their voices hushed. Lila felt completely out of place in her worn coat and old shoes. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, where Ethan Hale waited. He was even more striking in person than his voice had sounded. Sharp suit, calm eyes, a presence that filled the room without effort. He rose from behind a glass desk and offered a polite nod. You came. I thought about not coming, Lila admitted softly. But you said you could help. I can, Ethan said. But first we need to agree on the terms. He handed her a folder crisp, heavy paper, embossed with his company's seal. She opened it, her eyes scanning the neat lines of text. Agreement of temporary marriage. Duration: 6 months. Conditions: 1. Both parties will maintain a public appearance of marriage. 2. Personal lives remain private. 3. No emotional entanglement. 4. Full confidentiality until termination of contract. Lila's fingers tightened on the edge of the paper. You actually wrote this out? I do not leave things to chance, Ethan replied. His voice was steady, but there was something behind his eyes, something tired, maybe even lonely. You will receive a monthly stipend, all debts cleared, and your mother's treatment fully covered. When the 6 months end, you walk away free. She looked up, meeting his gaze. And what do you get? A reputation, he said without hesitation. The board expects me to settle down. They do not need to know it is not real. His head trolled. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city buzzed faintly outside the glass walls, distant and cold. Finally, Lila exhaled. This is crazy. Completely, Ethan agreed. Then he extended his hand. But sometimes crazy is the only thing that works. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. His grip was firm, warm, and surprisingly gentle. The touch sealed something deeper than a signature ever could. Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Hale, he said quietly. Lila almost laughed, a nervous sound caught between disbelief and fear. Please do not call me that, Ethan smiled faintly. For now, you might want to get used to it. A soft chime came from his desk. His assistant entered with 2 plain gold bands resting on a velvet tray. No ceremony, no music, no vows. Just 2 strangers standing in a glass office high above the world, pretending to be something they were not. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the cold metal made her shiver. Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than necessary and said, From this moment on, Lila, we are married at least to everyone else. The words echoed in her mind long after the meeting ended. She left the building wearing a ring that did not belong to love, in a life that did not belong to her. And yet, deep inside, something told her this story was only beginning. That evening, Lila stood in front of a full-length mirror inside a vast bedroom that looked more like a hotel suite than a home. Her reflection stared back at her same brown eyes, same tired face, but now framed by a new world. The gown she wore was borrowed, the shoes were not her size, and the diamond band on her finger caught the soft light like a lie that sparkled too bright. She had been in Ethan Hale's mansion for only a few hours, and already it felt like a museum, silent, immaculate, too perfect to breathe in. The housekeeper had shown her around with a polite smile that said she had seen many strange things but never asked questions. Dinner was at 7. That was the only instruction. When the antique clock struck the hour, Lila descended the curved staircase. Ethan was waiting at the long dining table, reading something on a tablet. His posture was relaxed, but his presence filled the room. You look different, he said, not unkindly. Different how? She asked, trying to sound casual. Like you are standing in a world that is not sure what to do with you yet. Lila gave a small, nervous laugh. That makes 2 of us. They sat opposite each other as servants brought silver trays of food she could barely pronounce. The silence stretched until Lila set down her fork and said, If we are really going to do this, I need to understand what I am walking into. Lively separate braid de seed in the body set by daps, separate flay. Ethan leaned back, studying her. Fair enough. You will be expected to attend several events with me. Dinners, galas, and 1 charity auction. You will be introduced as my wife. Beyond that, your life is your own. And the press? They will follow you, he said matter-of-factly. Every word, every photo. It is part of the image. She swallowed hard. I am not built for cameras. Then let them see that, Ethan replied. The world is tired of perfect. Maybe honesty will do us both some good. Something in his tone softened the air between them. For the first time since meeting him, Lila caught a glimpse of the man beneath the CEO armor, a flicker of exhaustion, or maybe truth. When dinner ended, Ethan stood. There is one more thing, he said, leading her to the study. On the desk lay the signed agreement and 2 sealed envelopes. This, he said, pointing to the first envelope, is your monthly payment schedule. The second holds a clause I added today. Lila frowned. What kind of clause? He hesitated before meeting her gaze. No one can force you to stay. If at any time this becomes too much, you walk away. No questions, no consequences. The words caught her off guard. She had expected control, not mercy. Why would you give me that? She asked quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Because I have spent too many years surrounded by people who stayed only because they were paid to. Lila looked down at the ring again. It felt heavier now, not from value but meaning. And if I walk away, then the story ends, he said softly. But I have a feeling it will not. He offered a polite nod before leaving the room, his footsteps fading into the marble hallway. Lila stood there alone, the mansion echoing around her. Outside, the city lights flickered through the glass windows like distant stars. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel desperate, only uncertain. The kind of uncertainty that hides right before something extraordinary begins. The next morning began earlier than Lila expected. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, spilling across the marble floor like gold. She had barely opened her eyes when a knock sounded at the bedroom door. Good morning, Mrs. Hale, a woman's voice said politely. Mr. Hale asked me to bring breakfast in your schedule for the day. Lila sat up quickly, still getting used to the sound of that name. Please, just call me Lila, she said as the housekeeper rolled in a tray covered with pastries, fruit, and coffee that smelled far too rich for her modest taste. There will be a wardrobe fitting at 10 and a lunch meeting at noon, the woman continued. Mr. Hale wants you to meet his stylist and his publicist before the gala this weekend. A small panic rose in Lila's chest. A gala? As in, people, cameras, questions? Yes, ma'am, the housekeeper said gently. You will do fine. When the woman left, Lila exhaled, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The girl who used to take the bus to work at a diner was now expected to stand beside one of the most powerful men in Seattle and look like she belonged there. By mid-morning, the stylist arrived, a cheerful woman named Clara, with sharp eyes and quick hands. We have 3 days to turn you into Mrs. Ethan Hale, she said, half joking, half serious. You have the posture of someone who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it. We will fix that. Lila laughed nervously. I cannot promise miracles. Good, Clara said. Miracles are my job. For hours she practiced walking in heels, holding her chin high, learning which fork to use and how to smile without looking terrified. Every stumble earned gentle laughter from Clara and quiet amusement from Ethan, who occasionally passed through the room, watching from the doorway. When the lesson ended, Clara packed up her tools and whispered, He watches you more than you think. Then she was gone, leaving Lila blushing and confused. That evening, Ethan joined her in the library. He was dressed down for once, no tie, just a gray sweater and dark jeans. The change made him look almost human. How was your first day of training? He asked, settling into a chair across from her. Humiliating, she admitted. I tripped twice, dropped a glass, and forgot how to breathe for an entire minute. Ethan chuckled quietly. You survived. That is progress. I do not think I will ever fit into your world. He looked at her then, really looked, and said, Do not fit in. That is what makes you interesting. The words lingered in the air longer than either of them intended. Lila lowered her gaze, hiding the small smile forming on her lips. A silence settled between them, but it was not the awkward kind. It was warm, like the quiet between two people who had stopped pretending for a moment. When she finally stood to leave, Ethan spoke again, softer this time. You did well today, Lila. The rest will come naturally. She turned to him, half in the doorway. Do you really think so? He met her eyes. I know so. That night, as she lay in bed, Lila replayed his words over and over. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt something stir inside her, a strange mix of pride, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. And somewhere in another room of that enormous house, Ethan Hale stared at the same rain falling against his window, wondering why the sound suddenly felt different than it had before she arrived. Saturday arrived with a soft hum of rain against the glass. It was the night of the gala, Ethan's first major public appearance since the announcement of his marriage. The house buzzed with quiet urgency. Stylists rushed through the halls, assistants carried garment bags, and a team of florists filled the foyer with pale white roses. Lila stood by the window of her room, Wearing the gown Clara had chosen, a deep blue satin dress that shimmered when she moved. It hugged her shoulders gently, flowing into a train that whispered with every step. She hardly recognized herself. When Ethan entered, dressed in a black tuxedo, she turned, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He looked at her not as a businessman assessing his new partner, but as a man caught off guard by something unexpected. "You clean up well, Mrs. Hale," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. Lila smiled nervously. "You do not look terrible yourself." They left the mansion together, the rain easing into a fine mist. Cameras flashed as soon as they stepped out of the car at the hotel ballroom. Voices shouted Ethan's name, then hers, though most of the reporters whispered it with curiosity, trying to guess who she really was. Inside, chandeliers glittered like constellations. The scent of champagne and perfume filled the air. Ethan guided her through the crowd, his hands steady at her back, his confidence like armor. But she could feel her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. "Remember," he murmured quietly, "you do not have to be perfect. You just have to be real." They greeted investors, journalists, and old friends of Ethan's. Most smiled politely, but Lila saw the judgment in their eyes, the silent question, why her? Then came the moment she feared most. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Hale, everyone is talking about your sudden marriage. Was it love at first sight?" Lila froze. The question hung in the air. Ethan watched her carefully, giving her the space to answer. She swallowed, then said slowly, "Love at first sight? I do not think love is something you can measure in a single moment. Sometimes it is a choice. Sometimes it begins as something unexpected, maybe even inconvenient, but it grows because you decide to see the good in someone." The room fell silent for a breath, and then soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan's eyes lingered on her, something proud and unguarded in his expression. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and handshakes. When the gala ended, Ethan and Lila stepped outside again, away from the cameras. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. "You handled that question well," Ethan said, his tone almost admiring. "I was terrified," Lila admitted, exhaling a shaky laugh. "But for the first time tonight, I did not feel like I was pretending." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe that is because you were not." They stood there in the quiet drizzle, neither moving nor speaking. The contract still existed between them, but the space it once occupied felt smaller, now filled with something warmer, something they both silently recognized but refused to name. As the driver opened the car door, Ethan offered his hand again. Lila hesitated before taking it, her fingers fitting naturally against his. That simple touch said more than any signature or promise could. For the first time, the arrangement no longer felt like a transaction. It felt like the beginning of something dangerously real. The next morning, the calm that had settled between them shattered like glass. Lila was in the garden, trimming roses, when she heard the sound of raised voices from the terrace. Ethan was not alone. A tall woman in a tailored white suit stood across from him, her tone sharp, her expression polished and cold. It took only a second for Lila to recognize her. Vanessa Ward, Ethan's former fiancée, daughter of the very investor whose approval still held sway over the Hale empire. The woman every magazine had once claimed was born to be Mrs. Hale. Lila froze, half hidden behind the hedges. 6 months? Vanessa's voice cut through the morning air. "Do you think no one can count? The board may buy your little fairy tale, Ethan, but I know what this is. A performance." Ethan's voice remained even, but tight. "My personal life is not a boardroom topic. In a live..." Vanessa laughed softly, her heels clicking against the stone. "You mean it is not until it threatens your control? Marrying some nobody out of nowhere? You think that will make you look more human?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "She is not built for this world. When it breaks her, remember I warned you." Then she turned and left, her perfume trailing behind like smoke. Ethan stood still for a long moment before he noticed Lila standing nearby. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth to speak, but she shook her head. "So that is what people think of me," she said quietly. "A charity case. A project to fix your image." "It is not like that," he said, taking a step forward. "I will have the car ready." She shook her head. "No, I will take the bus." "Lila, please," she said, her voice barely steady. "I need to be alone." And before he could stop her, she was gone. Hours later, Ethan stood by the window of his office, staring at the city below. His reflection looked back at him tired, hollow, and for the first time, afraid. He had spent his life controlling every outcome, every risk, every headline, but he could not control her. At that same moment, in the dim hospital room miles away, Lila sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand. The machines beeped steadily, the world quiet except for the faint rhythm of life and loss. She looked at the simple ring on her finger, its shine dull under the hospital light. Once it had been a symbol of survival. Now it felt like a lie too heavy to wear. As tears fell onto her palm, she whispered to herself, "Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I was never meant to stand beside him." Back in his office, Ethan reached for the phone, desperate to call her but stopped halfway. The rule echoed in his mind. No emotional entanglement. For the first time, Ethan Hale realized how cruelly easy it had been to make that rule, and how impossible it had become to live by it. 2 days passed before the storm broke completely. The story appeared on every news outlet by dawn. Ethan Hale's marriage exposed, contract wife revealed. The article included a leaked photo of the agreement, stamped with Ethan's signature. Every detail was printed in black and white. 6 months. Compensation, conditions. The world no longer saw Lila as the woman who softened a ruthless businessman, but as a liar who sold herself for money. By the time Lila arrived at the hospital cafeteria that morning, people were already whispering. She could feel their eyes on her, their judgment like tiny blades against her skin. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, each one worse than the last. Her hands shook as she turned on the small television in the corner. Ethan's face filled the screen, calm, unreadable, surrounded by flashing cameras as he left his corporate headquarters. Reporters shouted questions. Was it true? Did you pay her to marry you? He said nothing. Lila's heart sank. She turned the screen off, the silence in the room louder than the noise before. The only person who had ever defended her had just walked past a crowd of reporters and refused to speak. That night, rain poured harder than it had in weeks. Lila returned to her apartment, empty and quiet, the same place where this entire story had begun. She sank onto the floor beside her small suitcase and cried until her chest hurt. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat in his boardroom, facing the very people who had once admired him. Vanessa stood at the far end of the table, pretending sympathy. "You see, Ethan," she said smoothly, "this is what happens when you let feelings get in the way of logic. The board is calling for an emergency vote. They want you to step back as CEO until this situation is contained." He looked at her coldly. "You leaked it, did you not?" She smiled faintly. "Proof is a tricky thing, but if I were you, I would be grateful. This saves you from more embarrassment." Ethan rose slowly, his voice low but steady. "You made one mistake, Vanessa. You underestimated what this woman means to me." The room went silent. The board members exchanged wary glances, unsure what to make of the man they thought was incapable of love. That night, Ethan made his decision. He called a press conference for the following morning. When the lights of the stage came up, cameras clicking from every direction, Ethan stood alone before the microphones. His expression was calm, but his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "Yes," he said clearly. "The contract was real, every word of it." The crowd erupted in noise, but he raised his hand for silence. "What none of you know is that I was the one who needed saving. I created that contract to protect myself from feeling anything real, and I failed, because I fell in love with her." Gasps rippled through the reporters. The next words came slower, heavier. "Lila Carter never asked for a single dollar. She saved her mother with the money I forced her to take. If you want to blame anyone, blame me." Somewhere across town in the hospital corridor, Lila stood frozen, watching the broadcast play on the television above the nurse's station. Her breath caught as she heard Ethan's final words. "I am stepping down from Hale Industries, effective immediately. Some things are worth more than power. Some things are worth the truth." In and Dak died. The cameras flashed one last time before the screen faded to black. Lila pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, Ethan Hale had broken one of his own rules. He had chosen her not for convenience, not for appearance, but for love. 3 months later, the city had forgotten the scandal, but Lila never could. The world moved on quickly, as it always did, chasing a new story, a new face. She had returned to her old life working at a small art cafe near the waterfront, saving every dollar, visiting her mother every evening at the rehab center. She told herself that she was fine, that she preferred the quiet, but every night she still caught herself glancing at her phone, half expecting his name to appear. It never did, until one rainy afternoon. The cafe was nearly empty. Outside, the water of Puget Sound shimmered gray beneath low clouds. Lila was wiping tables when a familiar voice said behind her, "You still make the best coffee in Seattle." She turned sharply, heart stalling. Ethan stood in the doorway, no bodyguards, no suit, just a dark coat and tired eyes that somehow still carried warmth. She could not speak. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. "I figured I owed you one last cup." Lila found her voice, though it trembled. "You should not be here. People might recognize you." "I am not CEO anymore," he said simply. "No one cares where I drink coffee now." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the hum of the espresso machine filling the silence. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you do it? You lost everything." Ethan shook his head. "No, I did not. I just finally learned what everything actually means." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the counter. Lila frowned and opened it. Inside was a single-page, simple, handwritten, bearing one line. New agreement, no expiration, no terms, no pretending. At the bottom was his signature. Lila laughed through her tears, the sound breaking softly. "You are unbelievable." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone gentle. "But I had to try, because every time it rains, I remember the night you called the wrong number and how it saved me." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "And what if I say yes this time?" He stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes steady. "Then we start over. No contracts, no lies, just us." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she took his hand, the same hand she had once shaken in fear inside his glass office months ago. But now it felt different, warm, certain, real. Outside, the rain softened into mist as if the sky itself had exhaled. The cafe's window fogged slightly, framing them in a quiet world of their own. Ethan smiled. "Lila Carter, will you sign the last contract of your life?" She laughed, tears glistening. "Only if you promise to stop calling it a contract." He grinned. "Deal." When he pulled her into his arms, it was not a fairy tale ending. It was something better, two imperfect people choosing each other, again and again, without rules to bind them. Later that evening, as the lights flickered across the bay, Lila placed the signed page inside a frame behind the cafe counter. It read only 3 words now, written in bold ink. "No terms, forever." They have Vility staff for work, and for the first time since that wrong number, both of them finally felt home.